Now there's a question, which is, why does this matter? Why does it matter that people, 700 million today in sub-Saharan Africa, are living a life of greater prosperity? Well, one of the reasons that it matters is that those 700 million in 2025 are going to be about 1.1 billion, and in 2050 will be about 1.68 billion people. And if we're leaving that massive a population behind, if we're leaving them in a situation where they're still spending 15 hours each day and barely making ends meet and not getting a great education for their kids, not getting great health care, we're leaving all of this human opportunity behind. We're leaving people living in a state that is either not acceptable or is just not contributing to the overall well-being on the earth. The second thing is that if you have 1.68 billion people who are living, 70 or 80% of them are living in extreme poverty, and you have the rest of the world, or a large percentage of the rest of the world, living in relative prosperity, with relative comforts, with relative opportunities, then what you start to get is a difference between those who have and those who do not that creates social tension, huge social tension across boundaries. And if we're going to live together as human beings on this earth successfully, then those social tensions will fundamentally affect the interactions that we have between one another. And we see that in the world today. All of these conflicts that we see around the world, there are roots around power, and there are roots around disparities between people. And that is something that we need to be well aware of. So for these 1.68 billion, the question is, what can be done? How do we help? How do we engage? With Engineers Without Borders, we certainly know as engineers that technology is transformative. That if you go from traditional methods of, for example, in this photo you see on the left, traditional methods of processing grain, which people have probably seen, where you take a pestle and you're hammering it into a large tub almost, and you're really making the grain into smaller and smaller pieces, or taking the sheaths off the grain. That is extraordinarily time-consuming as compared to a technological solution where you're using perhaps a mechanical grinder or a diesel grinder or an electrical grinder to allow you to actually process through the exact same amount of grain in maybe 1/10 or maybe even 1/100th of the time. Technology, and whether it's around grain production or if it's around water and sanitation or if it's around any number of other areas, schools, roads, all of those types of things, technology has a transformative effect on societies. And so we know that with Engineers Without Borders. We know that technology is crucial. And so what do we do about it, though? And how do we understand what is done in the past and be able to learn from the best of that and avoid the worst of that? I'd like to give you an example. I'd like to take you quite a far away from Ghana and over to Southern Africa, and particularly the country of Malawi. Now this photo you see in Malawi is of a really neat technology called the plate pump. And it's something that we've not been involved with implementing in Malawi, but we've seen numerous times on the ground. And it's a great example of someone coming up with an innovative solution to getting water out of the ground by building a merry-go-round that kids can play on during the day. They get it going really, really fast, and it pumps water from 60 or 70 meters down, pumps it up about 10 or 15 meters to this tank. And once it's in the tank, then the women, who you can see in the background, they just turn a tap and the water comes flowing out because of the pressure. And when we drove up to this and actually saw this play pump, you can see that the kids immediately started playing, and it became really a lot of fun, and there's all of a sudden lots and lots of kids, and it actually got a little bit scary because it became going so fast and spinning so fast that the kids were almost flying off, and it was quite fun, and everybody was having a good time. And in this case, we sort of said, the immediate conclusion is, wow, what a brilliant technology. Kids can play and everybody gets water, everyone's happy. But what we decided to do is stick around for a little bit longer this time. rather than driving up in our SUV and just visiting for a minute or two or maybe even an hour, we decided to stick around for a few hours and see what happened. And so we waited a little bit longer, and the kids started to get a little bit disinterested, especially less interested as we stopped looking directly at the play pump. And then they eventually stopped playing on it. And what we realized was at the end, and you can see in this final photo, is that the people usually spinning this pump are not the kids, but they're the women. And it's usually only one or two women spinning this pump. And it's actually very difficult to turn this play pump and get the water from 60 meters down all the way to 20 meters up in the air. And in fact, it's so difficult to turn it that it's actually more difficult to turn this than to use a regular mechanical hand pump that many of you have seen. And this is actually a really bad technology, even though it looked really good. And the reason it's bad is because it's not designed for the users. Kids don't play on it. Kids don't have time to play on it. They're in school or they're working in the fields. And so it's the women who are turning this cumbersome pump trying to get water out of the ground. And what looked like a great idea to begin with, and what looked like a great idea on paper and looked like a great idea when we first showed up, is actually a bad idea. And it's something that we need to watch when we're thinking about technology and international development, and when we're thinking about international development and addressing any social issues for humanity, is that change is really difficult. And good intentions can actually lead to outcomes that we don't want. And if we're not asking really difficult questions all the time, then we're likely to not result in the result that we want. And we see this throughout Africa. I gave this example of the play pump in Malawi. This photo was also taken in Malawi. It's of a woman whose water point, which is fed from a set of pipes that are taken from a spring up in the mountains. This water pump doesn't work. And it's in fact like about 20 to 30% of water points throughout sub-Saharan Africa that have been installed, technology to transform people's lives, that doesn't work because the technology isn't appropriate, or people didn't put in the maintenance programs, or nobody involved the local government. And so we need to be very careful that we are implementing things in the right way, and that we're realizing that change is difficult, and so we need to really engage our thoughtfulness to make sure that it's going to be lasting. Now, I don't want this talk, though, to be all doom and gloom. The reality is it can work. Change can happen. It's difficult, but it can happen. This next photo is also from Malawi, and it's from an area where they got it right, where the water is flowing still today from a improved technology, which prevents people from having to walk incredible distances to get water. And the reason is because they put in place a water committee that was interacting with local government, and that water committee was collecting money that was able to maintain this technology over time, and it was able to have trained people locally to be able to maintain that technology. And so not only did they get the technology implementation right, but they also got all the little details that resulted in that technology actually working in the long term. They got that right too. And so it's something that we've learned with Engineers Without Borders. It's often that the small details are as important as the large details, and that the less sexy things, like having a water committee, is as important as the more sexy things, like being able to put in a pump and actually touch it and feel it and see it working. And it's something that I think is true as to all change. And as you are thinking about moving forward in the next stage of your lives, really think about that. What are the little details that we need to get right in addition to the big ideas in order to make change happen? For us with Engineers Without Borders, there's also a second side to this story, which is that when we think about the big challenges in the world, we often start to think about, in our case, of helping improve opportunity in Africa. We think about going over there and doing it in Africa, going to Malawi or going to Ghana. When we think about big issues like climate change, it's often about, how can we get the big emitters to stop emitting? But the reality is all this change starts at home. And in fact, it's where young people have the greatest opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives, to make a real difference on these issues, because we have so much energy and we have tremendous influence at home. This picture was taken during this wonderful campaign that we had in Canada, where we engaged hundreds of members of parliament, thousands of Canadians as volunteers, and actually spoke to almost 500,000 Canadians during this 1 year to talk to them about global poverty issues and the fact that we need to do better as a country, and the fact that we need to do better as individuals, and the fact that we need to do better as a political system in order to address this system. And through this action, and in our case it was all young people, it was all people between the ages of 18 and 25 who were able to reach out to all of these hundreds of thousands of Canadians, who were able to be a political force in Canada, and do so in a way that engaged people and really started with these issues at home in Canada. And through this work, we were able to pass laws and pass rules that have had an ongoing and lasting impact on this issue. And it's something that we've really internalized with Engineers Without Borders. While perhaps the most exciting work happens on the ground in Ghana or Malawi, some of the most impactful work on these global issues, on these issues that will bring humanity together, can happen and start right at home, and they can start right away with young people.